Hello, and welcome to Headquarter Compliance Inspections. My name is Angelina Ceja, and I work for an organization called AgSafe. In this session, we will tackle the paperwork requirements that come along with using pesticides and specifically having to do with headquarter compliance. Just briefly, our disclaimer. The content of this session is based on publicly available information. Such information is subject to change without notice, may be incomplete or condensed. Except where otherwise indicated, the information provided is based on matters as they exist as of the date of the presentation. Such information is provided as general information on the topics presented. Nothing presented today constitutes legal advice or opinion to participants or others attending or viewing this material, and is not a substitute for professional services. Every situation is different and subject to legislative activity and administrative or judicial changes in the law. You should also note that the views or opinions expressed by the presenters do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of AgSafe and of the Almond Board of California. We'll review the learning objectives for this session. First, we'll review the elements that an inspector looks for while conducting a pesticide headquarter inspection. We will also be providing practical solutions to compliance requirements while keeping handlers or pesticide handlers safe. So a headquarter inspection is different than an application inspection. Typically, an application inspection is unplanned. The county ag commissioner inspector sees someone spraying and then stops. Most of the time, a headquarter inspection is scheduled, and you and the inspector decide on a meeting date and time. Those can also be prescribed where you receive a meeting date and time from the ag commissioner. In particular, if it's been a while, a couple of years or longer since you've received a headquarter inspection. Headquarter inspections can be random, or again, at times they are a result of a violation that occurred during an application inspection. The form that appears on the screen is the county inspector form that they will use. They have it in a paper format or on a computer program, but the elements of compliance are the same. You can obtain a copy from your local ag commissioner's office. It is no longer available online. However, if you do receive notice of an inspection, they will provide this inspection report information as well. So the first element listed on the form is, do you have a valid permit to use and store pesticides? If you are spraying agricultural pesticides, a permit is required. The type of permit you need is dependent upon the types of pesticides that you're going to be using. If you do not need restricted materials, also called RUPs, like 2,4-D or aluminum phosphate, you need an operator ID. If you need restricted materials, but you will only hire a licensed and registered pest control business, then you may want a pest control business use only permit. This type of permit allows you to spray non-restricted materials like Roundup and hire a pest control business to apply the restricted materials. If you or an employee of yours plan to do the applying of restricted materials, then you do need a restricted materials permit. Prior to obtaining this type of permit, you need to be certified. You can either obtain a private applicator certificate or a PAC, a card, or a qualified applicator license, also known as a QAL. Most of the time, a private applicator card or certificate will suffice if you do not plan on doing pest control work for hire. You can take the test for the PAC at your local Ag Commissioner's office. And just as a reminder, they are changing the test as of 2024. You do need to retake the test if you are going to do any sort of fumigation, even if it's on your own land and it's not for hire. You will need to retake the test, and there is an additional test as well. Your county ag commissioner or the Department of Pesticide Regulation has more information around both the qualified applicator certificate, a qualified applicator license, or your private applicator certificate cards. So next is the notice prior to application. Any person performing pest control work must make sure that the operator of the property receives notice of the scheduled application. The notice must be made prior to the use of a pesticide and in enough time for the person notified to take appropriate action. A notice of completion is also required for applications made for the production of an agricultural commodity. An example of this is if you're a grower and hire a pest control business to do the spraying, the pest control business must let the grower know when they plan on spraying. The pest control business, when they plan on doing the application, so that the grower can then inform any employees or field workers that may walk within a 1/4 mile of the field that will be receiving that spray. You need to have some type of system in place so that you can not only answer the inspector's questions, but more importantly, you don't want anyone to mistakenly enter a treated field. So how do you accomplish this? So we talked a little bit about, we are going to talk about practical solutions. So one of the things we found is when we go do audits for growers, they will start their day with a little tailgate meeting, informing everyone if a field has been sprayed or if any fields are planned to be sprayed that day. This way, both the grower and the employees can schedule work in areas away from the pesticide application. You need to make your employees aware of the following. First, the date of the scheduled application. Also, the location and description of the field to be treated, the pesticide product name or names, the US EPA registration numbers and active ingredients, any spray adjuvant products you're using, and the California registration numbers if those are applicable, the applicable restricted entry interval or REI, if the pesticide product labeling requires the posting of treated fields, and any other precautions printed on the pesticide product labeling or included in applicable laws and regulations. Every county is a little different, so you do need to check with your counties related to the protection of employees or other persons during or after application. Remember to check with the pest control business, so even if you are not doing the application yourself, they are required to let you know of their completion time so that you can observe the correct reentry interval time period. And we will discuss this a little bit more in the next slide. So if you've hired a pest control business, they are required to notify you of the application completion time so that you can then take your employees, make your employees aware of that restricted entry interval. The restricted entry interval is the time period after a field is treated with a pesticide during which the restrictions on entry are in effect to protect persons from potential exposure to hazardous levels of pesticide residues. The operator of the property and any pest control business, farm labor contractor, or other contractor hired by the operator of the property that have any employees who are likely to enter the field while the REI is in effect must notify those employees. Handler and field worker employees who may walk within a fourth mile of the field during REI are deemed in regulation as likely to enter. This is a requirement for these records is that you keep them for 2 years. Again, communication with your employees, any subcontractors you might have in regards to pesticide use is key. And just to recap the application completion records, again, you will be asked for these during headquarter inspections. The notice must include the following: your location of property, site identification number and acreage treated, also the pesticide product name, the US EPA registration and active ingredient, any spray adjuvant products you use, the California registration numbers, the date and hour the application was completed. Remember, this is so you've observed the REI, the applicable reentry and pre-harvest intervals, unless a copy of a written recommendation for the subject application made by a licensed agricultural pest advisor properly completed was given to the operator of the property treated. So if you are using registered pesticides for an agricultural use, you must first obtain an operator ID number with the Agricultural Commissioner's Office. If you have a restricted materials permit, because you need to use restricted materials, you meet this requirement. New accounts will need to be new accounts will need to use pull down menu and contact county specific contacts for support with setup. Just to be sure you have done this prior to spraying, remember your permit usually has an expiration date of December 31st. If you have not renewed your permit for the following year, you cannot legally spray on January 1st. So again, remember for these restricted use, and we will provide the information for Cal Ag permits at the end of the presentation. So I've mentioned production ag use a few times. So in this slide that I'm sharing, there's a copy of what DPR deems ag use. You can also look this up at the DPR website. It will have this information. And one of the things I want to just highlight here is that, as you notice, this list isn't just orchards and field crops. It includes tree hole fumigation, even Christmas tree production. As you can see from this list, we have a lot of different commodities that are considered agricultural use, or excuse me, production agricultural use. So prior to using any registered pesticides on property that again is used for the production of an agricultural commodity, the property operator, or you as the grower, if you are a grower, must obtain a site identification number for each site where pest control will be performed. Each site must be identified on either a restricted materials permit or an operator identification form. The permit shall include the following information: the name and address of the operator of the property, the operator identification number, the location, description, or map of the sites or site where the pest control will be performed, a site identification number for each site where the pest control will be performed, the date of issuance of the site identification number. A copy of the permit must be kept for 2 years. Again, this is another documentation piece you need to ensure you have. Each county names sites differently, excuse me. Some may require you to name your site according to their naming system, like a A1 or 1215 A1, while others allow you to use your naming system, like Joe's Place. Whichever way, as long as your site is identified on the permit, be sure your site includes all of the locations that you plan to spray pesticides on. And this is very important that you ensure that all of the information is listed on there. And additionally, any person who uses pesticides for agricultural use shall record the following information, right? And again, it must be kept for 2 years. You have an example here of the monthly pesticide use report. It's a little dated, handwritten. We do have other forms now available, electronic availability as well for these. But the information is essentially the same. We need to ensure that we include the date of the application, the name of the operator of the property treated, the location of property treated, the crop, commodity, or site treated, the total acreage or units treated at the site, and the pesticide, including the US EPA registration number or the state registration number, which is on the pesticide label, and the amount used, and the location of the property treated by county, section, township, range, base, and meridian. The hour of the treatment was completed. The operator identification number issued to the operator of the property treated. The site identification number issued to the operator of the property treated. The total acreage planted, excuse me, or unit of the site, and the name or identity of the persons who made and supervised the application if the pesticide application was made by an agricultural pest control business. This requirement is kind of the chicken before the egg. Before you can keep record of pesticide use, you should have first submitted them to your local agricultural commissioner's office, which happens to be the next requirement. So pest use report submitted. The operator of the property where the pesticides were applied shall submit the pesticide use report to the agricultural commissioner's office by the 10th day of the following month in which the pesticides were sprayed. If you hire a pest control business to do the spraying, they are required to submit the reports to the ag commissioner within 7 days and send you, the grower, a copy within 30 days. The form shown here is available on DPR's website. You can find it. You can also submit it in paper form. You do not have to use specific forms. However, most ag commissioner's office will offer to triplicate a form, or you can use again an electronic form in a system like CalAg permits or any of the other sourcing sites that provide that service. Usually the chem companies will have something. Whichever you choose, be sure and do it. Not only is it in the regulation, but most counties check to see if you have submitted this form prior to renewing your permit every year. And this is your responsibility. Double check, especially those electronic submissions that the county ag commissioners from those third parties that they're actually receiving them. Please note that the form we're showing here is intended to report production ag use spraying. So what if you are just spraying, say, the rights of way area, like a canal, or a bank or a fence line? Well, in that case, you would use this form. This is the monthly summary form. And you can see there the information provided in it. There's a link provided as well to DPR's website to access this form. And this form, again, is different. It is the requirement for roadways, rights of ways. Again, I'm spraying a canal bank, I'm spraying around my field. I'm not actually spraying directly on an agricultural product that I'm using. So under regulation 6726 and 6766, the grower shall ensure that emergency medical care for employees handling pesticides shall be planned for in advance. The employer shall locate the facility where emergency medical care is available for the employees who will be handling pesticides. Employees shall be informed of the name and location of the facility where the emergency medical care is available. The employer shall post in a prominent place at the work site or work vehicle, if there is no designated work site, the name, address, and telephone number of a facility able to provide emergency medical care whenever employees will be handling pesticides. And if the identified facility is not reasonably accessible from the work location, procedures to be followed to obtain emergency medical care. When there is reasonable grounds to suspect that an employee has a pesticide illness, or when an exposure to a pesticide has occurred that might reasonably be expected to lead to an employee's illness, the employer shall ensure that the employee is taken to a physician immediately. Be sure that if you suspect any kind of pesticide illness, that you take the employee to the doctor. Do not let them go home or have a family member take them. You are required to take them. This issue has come up multiple times for individuals that have been inspected. So make sure that you take care of that. Again, look for an emergency medical service location or facility that is nearby. Make sure that you've posted it somewhere, whether that's in a central location. If they are in a vehicle, typically very much, as you can see from this picture, if you can put it on the piece of equipment, it has to be durable enough. If it's just on a piece of paper, it's going to wash away or it's going to get dirty. So make sure that it's something that's a little bit more substantial, laminated, even stickers, if they're going to wash off, that's not going to be acceptable. Something that is durable, ensuring that the employee has access to that information, and then remembering that they're not driving themselves to the location, that it is your responsibility to take them and take care of that, or provide them with information to be able to call for help or support. A change area. So for any employee who regularly handles pesticides with the signal word danger or warning, and for all employees who handle any pesticides for the commercial or research production of an agricultural plant commodity, the employer shall ensure that there is at the place where the employees end their exposure period and removal of their protective personal equipment, an area where employees may change clothes and wash themselves, clean towels, soap, and sufficient water shall be available to allow for thorough washing. The employer shall provide a clean, pesticide-free place where employees may store any personal clothing not in use while at work handling pesticides. So you have to make sure you have an area available for them to be able to do that. Proper storage of personal protective equipment. The employer shall provide all protective personal equipment required by pesticide product labeling, regulation, and restricted material permit condition. Remember, we get the restricted material permits from our counties, and they might have additional requirements. Provide for its daily inspection and cleaning according to pesticide label instructions. Wash in detergent and hot water, excuse me. And repair or replace any worn, damaged, or heavily contaminated personal protective equipment. Leather gloves used to apply only aluminum phosphide or magnesium phosphide pesticides and which have been aerated for 12 hours or more are considered cleaned. Assure that all clean personal protective equipment, when not in use, is kept separate from personal clothing and in a clean and pesticide-free area specifically designed for that. Assure that personal protective equipment is used correctly for its intended purpose. Keep and wash potentially contaminated personal protective equipment separately from other clothing or laundry. Assure that all clean personal protective equipment is either dried thoroughly before being stored or is put in a well-ventilated, dry place. Assure that personal protective equipment remains the property of the employer and that pesticide handlers are not allowed or directed to take potentially contaminated personal protective equipment into their homes. However, employees whose workday, does not involve return to the employer's headquarters shall remove and store potentially contaminated coveralls in a sealable container outside of their own living quarters for later return to the employer. Employer record keeping. The employer shall maintain records for all employees performing fumigation handling activities. As of 2024, individuals doing fumigation handling activities do require additional licensing and certification either by your county or by the state. The records must identify the person, work activity or activities, the date, the duration of the handling, the US EPA registration number and the brand name of that methyl bromide product that is being used or handled. The employer shall maintain these records at a central location for at least 2 years. Before employees are allowed to handle pesticides, the employer shall display in a central location the A8 for handlers and the A9 for field workers. In a non-agricultural setting, you would post the N8, which is the non-agricultural settings series. An example of this would be if you were a processor and you fumigated almonds on your property. There is a link here to the entire pesticide safety information series. DPR has it available in both English and in Spanish. However, you don't only have to post, you also have to ensure that you are filling in the emergency medical information on these documents and the address and specific location of where employees can find the application specific information. There is a list of what and where pesticides have been sprayed so that employees can be certain that they are not working in those treated areas. We will talk a little bit more about this specific information in the next slide. It is important that employees have unimpeded access to this information. When you do or are visited by an inspector for field worker inspections, the field worker must have access to these records. According to DPR, A field worker is anyone who is performing work in a field that has been sprayed in the last 30 days, plus the time of REI. In this case, if you are visited by an inspector, they would look at the A9 to ensure that a location was listed as to where they could find the spray information. Then that inspector would travel there. If the information was either locked up in a shop or otherwise there was impeded access to that information or it wasn't there, then the grower would be in violation. An easy fix is that as a grower, you're required to provide restroom facilities and other types of postings as well. So go ahead and include this information there as well. If you have it in a binder, be sure that the binder is open to that page and that the employees have complete access. Again, I would probably stay away a little bit from the binder and have it just posted again and displayed where access is, where it's accessible to them, and they can just see it and quickly reference that information. But remember, you do have to fill out certain information on the pesticide safety information series, not just posting it, you also have to fill out information in it. We also mentioned the application-specific information display previously. It is an important tool in the communication with your employees. Not to mention it is part of the regulation. So what does it say? What do we need to have? The operator of property shall display at a central location the following application-specific information while employees are employed to handle pesticides. First, make sure that you identify the treated area. Also have the time and date of the application. Have the restricted entry interval or the REI. The product name, the EPA registration number, and what the active ingredient or ingredients are. If you're using a spray adjuvant, also that spray adjuvant name and California registration number if applicable. The information shall be displayed within 24 hours of the completion of an application and include all applications that have been made to any treated field on the agricultural establishment within a quarter mile of where employees will be working. Once displayed, the information shall remain displayed until the area no longer meets that definition of a treated field or the handler employees will no longer be on the establishment, whichever occurs earlier. I do recommend doing your pesticide use report following the completion of your application. You have to do it anyway. As long as you are doing the pesticide use report within 24 hours, you can then post a copy of it to meet this requirement. If you really want to impress an inspector and more importantly protect your employees, include a map of the site along with the information. However, the map is not a requirement. If you are planning on training your own employees, you must meet one of the following requirements. The person conducting the training for employees who will be handling pesticides for the commercial or research production of an agricultural plant commodity shall be qualified as one of the following. They can either be a California certified commercial applicator or a California certified private applicator, or a person holding a valid county biologist license in pesticide regulation or investigation and environmental monitoring issued by the Department of Food and Agriculture, or a farm advisor employed by the University of California Extension Office, or a person who has completed an instructor trainer program presented by one of the following: the University of California Integrated Pest Management Program, or B, other instructor training program provided by the director, and you can find a list of these on the DPR website, or a California licensed agricultural pest control advisor, or a California registered professional forester, or other trainer qualification approved by the director. There were changes made in both 2017 and 18 with the requirements, both by EPA and also by DPR. Additionally, there were other trainer requirements and more so in terms of training topics added in 2024. Once you are certified to do the training, you are required to have a written training program. This is another piece that the ag inspector will request of you if doing a headquarter inspection. So the training program shall describe the material. So what is it that you use to train workers? Was it study guides, pamphlets, pesticide product labeling, pesticide safety information, series leaflets, safety data sheets, slides, any video you might have used, and information that will be provided and used to train your employees and identify the person or firm that will provide the training. So if you're not providing the training and hiring a third party to do the training, also include that information. The training program shall address each of the subjects specified in subsection B that is applicable to the specific pesticide handling situations. The employer shall maintain a copy of this training program while they're using it and for 2 years after its use at a central location at the workplace. And we will discuss the elements that you need to cover in the training in the next slide. Again, the document that's provided here, which you can download from the DPR website, serves as the cover page for your training program. And you can use it again. I recommend that you keep the paperwork in some sort of binder. A pesticide compliance binder is a great tool. You can have sections, and then when you have that headquarter inspection, you can just bring it all out and all of your documents are stored there. And I mentioned that I was going to talk a little bit about handler training. So what is handler training, or what are the components required? So the training shall cover for each pesticide or chemically similar group of pesticides to be used. We need to ensure we're covering the format and meaning of information, such as precautionary statements about human health risk hazards contained in pesticide product labeling, hazards of pesticides including acute and chronic effects, delayed effects, and sensitization, as identified in pesticide product labeling, safety data sheets or pesticide safety information series leaflets, the routes by which pesticides can enter the body, signs and symptoms of overexposure, emergency first aid for pesticide overexposure, how to obtain emergency medical care, routine and emergency decontamination procedures, including spill cleanup and the need to thoroughly shower with soap and water after the exposure period, need for limitations, appropriate use and sanitations of any required personal protective equipment, prevention, recognition, and first aid for heat-related illness in accordance with Title 8 of the California Code of Regulations, safety requirements and procedures, including engineering controls, again, closed systems, possibly for handling, transporting, storing, and disposing of pesticides, any environmental concerns such as drift, runoff, and wildlife hazards, warnings about taking pesticides or pesticide containers home, requirements of this chapter and Chapter 4 relating to pesticide safety, safety data sheets, and pesticide safety information leaflets, the purposes and requirements for medical supervision of organophosphate or carbamate pesticides with the signal word danger or warning on the labeling are mixed, loaded, or applied for the commercial or research production of an agricultural plant commodity. The location of the written hazard communication information for employees handling pesticides, or that A8 that we mentioned earlier, other pesticide safety information series leaflets, and safety data sheets. The employee's rights, including the right to personally receive information about pesticides to which he or she may be exposed, for his or her physician or employee representative to receive information about pesticides to which he or she may be exposed, to be protected against retaliatory action due to the exercise of any of his or her rights. The training shall be in a manner the employee can understand, be pursuant to the written training program and include response to questions. So the trainer must be present. Training shall be completed before the employee is allowed to handle pesticides, continually updated to cover any new pesticides that this employee will handle, and repeated at least annually thereafter. Initial training may be waived if the employee submits records showing that the training meets the requirements of this section, covering the pesticides and use situations applicable to the new employment situation. Was received again within that last year. A certified applicator is considered trained for the purposes of this section. The date and extent of initial and annual required trainings given to the employee and the job to be assigned shall be recorded. So you need to know what is the employee going to do. You need to put that on there. This record shall be verified by the employee's signature and retained by the employer for 2 years at a central location at the workplace accessible to employees. Respiratory written program. General requirements. The employer shall assure that employees use approved respiratory equipment in compliance with this regulation when handling pesticides where respirators are required by label, restricted material permit condition, or regulation. In any workplace where respirators are required by label, restricted material permit condition, regulation, or employer, the employer shall establish a written respiratory protection program with work site specific procedures. The program shall be updated as necessary to reflect those changes in workplace conditions that affect respirator use. The employer shall include in the program the following provisions as applicable. You need to talk about the procedures for selecting respirators for use in the workplace, medical evaluations of employees required to use them, fit test procedures for tight-fitting respirators, procedures for proper use of respirators in routine and reasonably foreseeable emergency situations, procedures and schedules for cleaning, disinfecting, storing, inspecting, repairing, discarding, and otherwise maintaining respirators, procedures for ensuring adequate air quality, quantity, and flow of breathing air for atmosphere supplying respirators, training of employees in the respiratory hazards to which they are potentially exposed during routine and emergency situations, training of employees in the proper use of respirators, including putting on and removing them, any limitations on their use and their maintenance, and procedures for evaluating the effectiveness of the program. The respirator program administrator shall administer the respirator protection program in compliance with this section. And 2, the employer shall provide respirators training and medical evaluations at no cost to the employees. There are also record-keeping requirements for this section. So making sure that you have your medical recommendations, fit testing, and that you included there the respirator program. There are sample program available for use, and I do highly recommend that you review the program. If you are using respirators under Title 8, it is very similar to Title 3. However, I do recommend that you go through each of those sections and ensure that you have all of the pieces that are required if you are using respirators. Additionally, you also need to make sure that you have a respiratory medical evaluation. The employer shall ensure a medical evaluation is conducted to determine the employee's ability to use a respirator before the employee is fit tested or required to use the respirator in the workplace. The employer may discontinue an employee's medical evaluations when the employee is no longer required to use a respirator. And then making sure that you have identified a physician or other licensed healthcare professional to perform the medical evaluations, and they can use the medical questionnaire again as provided by the Department of Pesticide Regulation. Ensuring that this information is considered confidential. You as an employer do not have access to this information. You do need to ensure that you're using a physician, other licensed healthcare professional to be providing these examinations and answering these questions if your employees need support or provided support for that. You also need to provide for respiratory fit test records. So the employer needs to ensure that the employees are using a tight-fitting face piece respirator, pass an appropriate qualitative fit test or a quantitative fit test. So they will ask also for these records, which are done annually as well. So initially at time of use and then annually as well. So ensure that you have those records available, as you will be asked for those records as well. You need to ensure that all respirators are inspected before each use and during cleaning, and that routine use respirators, including the following, are checked, right? So we have to check the function, tightness, any of the conditions, parts limited but not limited to the face piece, the head straps, valves, connecting tube, cartridges, canisters or filters, etc., right? So ensuring that you're doing that. There is also a pesticide safety information series leaflet that includes this information as well. So if you are using respirators, ensure that you're covering off on that information with your employees, as that is also part of if you are training internally or externally, that you need to ensure that you have if they are using respirators. Additionally, you need to ensure that respirators are stored to protect them from any damage, contamination, dust, sunlight, extreme temperatures, excess moisture, or damaging chemicals. Respirators need to be packed or stored to prevent deformation of the face piece and exhalation valve. So if you do have any of these half face or full face respirators, ensuring that you are keeping them not out in the elements, or your employees aren't keeping them out in the elements, but that they are being cleaned and stored properly as to avoid any of the damage that can affect its use. If the employer determines that any voluntary use respirator use is permissible, the employer shall provide the respirator users with the information contained in subsection R and display, this is the display that you can use, and display this information alongside the display of either the hazard communication information for employees handling pesticides and X settings, the A8, or the hazard communication information for any of the non-ag settings. Again, that's the N8 in a central location in the workplace. For medical supervision, if you have, whenever an employee mixes, loads, or applies pesticides with the signal word danger or warning that contain an organophosphate or carbamate for the commercial or research production of an agricultural plant commodity, the employer shall maintain use records that identify the employee, the name of the pesticide, and the date of use. The original or copies of documents otherwise required to be maintained by this chapter shall be used to meet the requirements of the section, provided they contain the information required in this section. Each employer who has an employee who regularly handles pesticides specified in A shall have a written agreement signed by a physician that includes the names and addresses of both the physician providing the medical supervision and the employer responsible for the employees, stating that the physician has agreed to provide medical supervision and that the physician possesses a copy of and is aware of the contents of the document. And so here there's guidelines available as well. We've provided those links there as well for you if you want to download that information. A copy of this agreement shall be given to the commissioner by the employer no later than when the employee begins to regularly handle pesticides specified in A. Remember, these are the organophosphate and carbamate. Here's just an example of the records that must be retained for purposes of this rule. So the employer shall post the name, address, and telephone number of the medical supervisor in a prominent place in the locale where the employee usually starts the workday. If there's no locale where the employee usually starts the workday at each work site or in each vehicle. So if we don't have a place, we need to ensure that we have the information, the medical information there. Pesticide storage, possession permit for storage. So except as provided by this section in section 6400, 6414, and 6416, restricted materials shall be possessed or used only under permit of the commissioner or under his direct supervision or under permit of the director of in any county in which there is no commissioner. The person named in a restricted material permit is authorized to retain, possess, except for sale of materials for which the permit was valid after such permit expires, provided that they are stored in accordance with section 6670 and 6672. So remember just making sure that your permit list depending on the materials that you have. So what should you do with containers? So making sure that your that your containers are secured. Each person who controls the use of any property or premises is responsible for all containers or equipment on the property that hold or have held a pesticide. So this includes empty containers. Unless all containers are under his personal control so as to avoid contact by unauthorized persons, this individual shall provide a person reasonable to him to maintain such control over the container at all times, or store all containers in a locked enclosure, or in the case of liquid pesticides in a container larger than 55 gallons in capacity, the container shall have a locked closure. Either shall be adequate to prevent unauthorized persons from gaining access to any of the materials. So storage posted warning danger. So signs visible from any direction of probable approach shall be posted around all storage areas where containers that hold or have held pesticides required to be labeled with the signal words warning or danger are stored. Each sign shall be of such size that it is readable at a distance of 25 feet and be substantially as follows. Danger, poison storage area, all unauthorized persons keep out, keep doors locked when not in use. The notice shall be repeated in an appropriate language other than English when it may reasonably be anticipated that persons who do not understand the English language will come to the enclosure. Containers labeled enclosure. Except as provided by the Food and Ag Code pertaining to the service containers, any container that holds or has held any pesticides when stored or transported shall carry the registrant's label. All lids or closures shall be securely tightened except when the procedure described in section 6684 has been followed. This section shall not apply to measuring devices that are not used to store or transport a pesticide. So what is a service container? It's a container other than the original labeled container of the registered pesticide provided by the registrant that is utilized to hold, store, or transport the pesticides or the use dilution of the pesticide. It must be labeled with the name and address of the person or firm responsible for the container, the identity of the pesticide in the container, and the word danger, warning, or caution in accordance with the label on the original container. As with the picture that's shown, we do see some growers and pest control businesses have these types of laminated tags on the service containers. So making sure that you have something that identifies what is in the container if it's not in its original container. So proper containers. In no case shall a pesticide be placed or kept in any container of a type commonly used for food or drink or household products. We've lost count of the number of investigations that people have done where they have put pesticides into a water bottle and then someone not knowing will take a gulp and then end up at the hospital. And just as a side note, whenever someone sees a doctor due to pesticide illness of exposure, the doctor is required by law to report it to the local ag commissioner office. In turn, the ag commissioner's office must conduct an investigation. So remember, do not place anything that is not for drinking or eating in a container that is used for drinking or eating. Container properly rinsed. Again, this is another piece, ensuring that making sure that you're partially filling the container with water, shaking and emptying it into the spray tank. You want to repeat this process at a total of 3 times. Remember, you're supposed to do this after mixing. The rinsing solution is supposed to be poured into your spray tank. And there are some exceptions to this, but making sure that you're doing that triple rinse with those containers is important. So just a quick recap and review of the materials and the information that we have covered so far. Ensuring that we've discussed the elements that an inspector looks for in conducting a pesticide headquarter inspection. We've talked extensively around information having to do with operator permits, what identification you need, all of the pesticide safety information series and training requirements that you have. We've talked about the paperwork requirements, use reports, any restricted materials you might have. We've talked about storage of pesticides. We've talked a little bit about containers, properly rinsed containers, and ensuring that you have all of those. Making sure that you have all of the information that you need. We've also talked about some of the programs that you are required to have, including a qualified trainer program for both your field workers and your handlers. They will ask for this documentation. With handlers in particular, if it's an application inspection, they will ask questions around if they understand the labels. This is very imperative, especially for the employer, to ensure that they are covering off on all of the labels or active ingredients or similar information, that the employee is aware of what they are using. We also talked a little bit about decontamination of both the individual and both the individual, and then what to do with personal protective equipment, including not taking that equipment home. We've talked about some practical solutions for compliance requirements that help keep your handler safe. I do highly recommend that you put together a binder. It can be a physical binder that is easily accessible, that has the information, has all of your operator IDs, has any sort of permit. So if you're a private applicator certificate, will have information on that. Has your records. For the most part, most of these records require that you keep records for at least 2 years. And I recommend, again, a binder or some sort of file, accordion file, to keep all of that information, as you will be asked. And just as a reminder, the inspector will walk around your workplace, so that central area when they come to do the headquarter inspections. It won't only be checking your paperwork, it will also be checking the physical facility. If you in that facility are storing those pesticides, the reminders about the signage that you need to have, the appropriate signage, ensuring that those pesticides are kept away from workers. So in a location that's locked away, that is not easily accessible to them. You also want to ensure that you have all of those displays or postings in a central area, as that's another piece that they will walk around, where you're storing your PPE, that it's dried and secure, and I would say adequately labeled as well. I've seen plastic bins used, which are great. Sometimes just making sure that you are labeling them for the employee to be able to see where you're storing that PPE for them. Making sure you have adequate supplies of those. If you happen to be and they're doing your headquarter inspection at your work site where you typically mix and load the pesticides, then ensuring that you have appropriate decontamination area, that change area as well. So making sure that you have all of those pieces when they do come around. Ensuring that we also have, and we mentioned previously, access to CalAg permits. And we provide there the website availability. The California Department of Pesticide Regulation has a variety of forms and documents, including the extensive list of what are the respiratory protection requirements that an employer must have if they are using respirators. If you're not sure where to find the information, then it does have a nice search function that works quite well. You also have access here. We just put in the pesticide use forms. But the California Department of Pesticide Regulation has the training records, the sample programs. Again, it won't include all of the information, but the majority of the information that you need to stay compliant will be available to you there as well. For any additional information about this presentation or questions, you can contact us via our website, www.agsafe.org, or you can call our number, area code 209-526-4400. On behalf of AgSafe and the Almond Board of California, I would like to thank you for your time this afternoon or today, whenever you are taking this class. Thank you so much.